You're listening to Tonebender's Sound Design Podcast, presented by Sound Ideas, where we talk with the sonic artists behind our favorite films, games, and series. This Cyber Monday, Sound Ideas is offering an incredible opportunity. You can take 50% off all proprietary sound libraries, including some of the most trusted effects in post-production. And for creators looking to expand fast, the General HD collection is on flash sale at $750, down from its regular $2,995. This is your chance to grab pro-quality sound effects for a fraction of the price. Visit sound-ideas.com to upgrade your sound library today. Hello and welcome to Tonebenders. My name is Tim Muirhead, and today we're going to be talking with the sound supervisor and re-recording mixer that has had an insanely busy year. So far in 2025, Johnnie Burn has worked on the terrifying 28 Years Later, the bizarre Bugonia, the emotional roller coaster that is Hamnet, and the tense Tuner. All these are fantastic movies, and they are all extremely different in tone and execution. So let's welcome back to the show. Welcome back to Tonebenders, Johnny. It's great to talk to you again.
Tim, it's lovely to see you again and lovely to be talking.
I recall reading an article back when I first became aware of you and your work, when you were doing interviews about the movie Under the Skin. And part of what you would talk about is how you were one of the only people working on the sound of the film. You were very focused. You were on it for a long period of time. And I felt like in those movies, it showed in that you developed kind of like a sonic voice over the first couple films that you did. But I'm assuming, based on the volume of films that you're putting out right now, that you can't be the only person working on these films. So how do you maintain the idea of kind of your sonic voice, the reason people come to you for films, while also, I'm assuming, having to scale up the crew size and the volume of work?
I'm really fortunate to have a fantastic team. I mean, Under the Skin was my baptism of fire and learning alongside the incredibly meticulous Jonathan Glazer how we would like to do film and film sound. And that turns out it's quite laborious. But yeah, on that film, I started gathering a team, and that's Simon Carroll, Brendan Feeney, Max Behrens, and Declan Illett, who are now the core people that I work with, along with occasional dialogue editors and other sound designers as needs be. But essentially, yeah, it's a process of trying to work in one iteration of software rather than lots of different rigs. And each member of my team knowing that they have autonomy to work on a scene and not just the dialogue or just the sound effects or something. But, you know, I'm encouraging everyone to compartmentalize the film into different scenes, and you can adjust anything you like in that to kind of make the scene work. A lot of it is trying out ideas and getting things going and then discussing with the team how to take that further across the film. We rely heavily on a marker track. You know, every scene has a marker track with 40 different markers that will indicate, specific things that we kind of want to hit. But to carry out that enormous amount of work that, goodness, I'm tired, in a year is only possible because I've been working with these guys for, many of them now for over 10 years, and they're all incredibly skilled, and we all know exactly what each other's strengths and weaknesses are, and we know how to kind of carry out detailed work in a shorthand form because we've been doing it a long time, basically.
The marker tracks that you're talking about, you're saying you're using markers to communicate to the team what scenes need and where to pay extra attention and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, so there'll be a dialogue marker track that will point out, bits of noise or EQ discrepancies, tonal mismatches. Try and avoid ADR as much as possible. So, noise reduction stuff. And, let's look for another take on this one, something with, where it's more poignant or whatever, or flatter, that kind of stuff. And then there'll be notes on, the backgrounds. These are great, but we need a layer that is more empty so that we can take a choice when we hear it in a big room. And then it'll be markers about the overall conceptualization of sound use in the film and areas that we're going to choose, particular scenes that are pivotal that will demonstrate use of sound. On every film, it starts with a script read, and that usually generates some ideas. Like on Hamnet, I called Chloe Zhao and said, I've got some ideas. And she said, wait, come for Sunday lunch. So I went and discussed all these ideas, and she was like, well, those are actually pretty interesting. And if you can prove that they work, then I'll change the way I shoot it. So like a week later, I went back for another Sunday lunch, but with a load of demonstrations of...
So this is before she'd even started shooting? This is just...
Before she'd even shooting, I was playing her birds that were tweeting in iambic pentameter. Just ideas for how we might use sound. So what we try and do is build a library of, these are the backgrounds we might want to use. These are the key sound effects. This is Michelle being electrocuted in Bugonia, and give the picture editor and the director a bunch of apposite, unique sounds that I hopefully can go all the way through to the final mix. Obviously many of them don't, but at least they're not using placeholders. It's sort of, here's a solid idea. So during production, go and visit the set, hang around a bit, look at the monitors, see what's going on, talk to the picture editor, get the vibe off the director if anything's changing in the ideas we discussed, and then have a list of locations and go to those locations like the day after they went there, so that there aren't all the noise of people, but you can go to the house and turn all the door handles and do all the footsteps and record the bees and, everything else that still exists. And then that gets brought into a library. And part one of Sound Design, I see it, is helping the picture editor stuff some of these into the Avid. And then at the point of sort of director's cut, which is usually a point in time, right, sort of 10 weeks or something, taking that and getting an output of the Avid and playing that on a mixing stage at 85 dB, Dolby 7, and making a bunch of notes. And on that first pass, it'll be like, hundreds of notes. But for the assistant editor or me to go and sit with someone, or one of my team to sit with someone in front of the Avid and adjust various bits of dialogue, swap out bits, clean up noise on things, and polish up the Avid so that actually plays as a temp mix for screenings and stuff. And so you start unveiling, is that the right word, yourself into the sound architecture of the film, and hopefully relieving a lot of burden on assistant editors to kind of find sound effects. So you're then kind of one foot in the door on helping to grow the soundscape of a film. And then once you start getting a proper cut, then by that point, we get our kind of first turnover. We've usually got a pretty full timeline. Even if we haven't got the picture, we know where the scenes are going to land time-wise from the script. And we'll have lots and lots of different sound collages of backgrounds and key sound effects already, in place in a timeline, waiting to be shuffled into a more accurate space. And then the period from sort of, pictures never lock nowadays, do they? But the cut gets sort of pretty close. So throughout all that period, we're chasing the cut. We're working on our version of the film and crucially trying to actually sculpt the mix. So like every week I'll be playing budding sound mix on a mix stage at film level, because it's so annoying otherwise. You just, if you wait till the end to go to a final mix room, basically you go, oh, everything's too bloody loud, all the quiet stuff is, there's no subtlety. So trying to dial the subtlety in early and trying to get the dialogue, which is, the linchpin of any film really, to sound as pristine as possible. And hopefully the shape of the body of work in the kind of whole sound design of a film, hopefully is all done in that middle bit of post-production. And then the last few weeks of the final mix are changing ideas, but you really got a good mix in place already in pre-dub stages that you take to the final mix stage, and you consider that more of a mastering session because all the kind of key decisions have been made and you're just sitting there and just really tinkering on like, tiny little details, That's about it in a nutshell.
In a nutshell. That makes sense to me when you're working on one film. But if you're working on four, maybe I'm wrong in that these films were not overlapping because they were done a long time ago and didn't get released till now. But I'm assuming there was some overlap with this many films releasing all in 1 year. It seems like your goal is to really embed yourself in the post-production process with the picture editor and everything. But how can you do that with multiple films happening?
Yeah, it's insane. I mean, I worked every evening and weekend this year.
Wow.
But, I met Danny Boyle, and when I was going to the Vanity Fair party at the Oscars, someone from my work called, and it was like 1 a.m. in LA, and they said, I've got Danny Boyle here in reception, and he wants to have a word with you. And he was like, Johnny, I know you're not here because I just saw you on the TV, but I really would love you to do the sound of my next film, so will you do that? And I was like, holy shit, yeah, of course, I'd love to work with you. And so that was 28 years later, and then Yorgos said, I'm doing another film. And I was like, of course, I can't not do that because this will be our 6th film. And then I met Chloe Zhao at a Zone of Interest sort of well done team dinner. And she said, and I thought, I can't turn that down either. So it became quite a busy year. And yeah, it's just a long process of, shifting focus. That was the hardest thing, was to put yourself in a different headspace with a different goal, going from, zombies through space and sci-fi to Shakespeare in England, and all with very different requirements. We made sure that the mixes were all a couple of months apart. I mean, that was the key to being able to achieve it.
So speaking of the multiple movies, I wanted to talk a bit about ambiences, particularly for 28 Years Later and Hamnet. Both of these films would require ambiences without airplanes in the background, without cars in the background. And yet they're very different ambiences. They're evocative of completely different, like the forest in one film is a magical place and the forest in another film is a terrifying place. Do you want to talk about building the ambiences for kind of similar settings, but completely different outcomes?
With 28 Years Later, it was really interesting because the more we put in sound-wise, the more overgrown Britain seemed as a place that's gone feral. And for a good few months, I had a weekly meeting with Danny in Soho, and we'd listen to where we were, and he just keeps saying, put more in. At dawn, you can hear birds sing, and birds sing because there's no traffic around, and they know they can be heard. But, near a motorway, they don't bother singing. And so we definitely had this idea that in a machine-free world, the animals would all speak up. And we went on a lot of recording trips to get, thick bird atmospheres. But, for example, where in 28 Years Later, the scene where the Scandic soldier and the boy and his mother walked through the forest, we imagined every tree had a bird in it. Each one was a sort of Atmos object that would move along with, as the camera passed through them. And you'd hear all of that and the flapping of the wings. And the more detailed everything got, the more overgrown Britain seemed, which was entirely right for that film. And in complete contrast, Chloe said to me, you are not going to put birds in my film everywhere. I hate when sound effects editors just lump loads of birds in. She said, if you want to put any birds in my film, each one has to be, ratified by me, to the point that it became a joke that I actually had to do a written application form. I made this mock-up thing. And so when Hamnet, the boy, is, when he goes into his garden just after his father leaves, we hear one single solo bird, and it's a very sad sounding bird. And that was, specifically created to convey that emotion in a very singular and spare way. And when William walks in the forest, there's a bird that goes, which is the Shakespearean rhythm of all of his verse. And there are a few other specific birds. But yeah, every single item in that film was very carefully placed and auteured by the auteur herself. Yeah, as far as planes go, bloody hell. Elstree, where a lot of Hamnet was filmed, is under the flight path, and as was the forest. So none of it was particularly easy. There's very minimal ADR. There's a lot of noise reduction techniques that we're all familiar with nowadays, removing it. But it was interesting, actually, because halfway through the mix, I had used the noise cleanup dial a little bit too aggressively. And Chloe made this comment that she was starting to feel disconnected from the actors. And, she couldn't put a finger on it, but what is it that I had done? And I sort of went, I've got rid of the airplane sounds, And she's like, yeah, but it's sort of taken the life out of it as well, because it removed a lot of the natural hiss that is the credibility thing, the fabric of sound that you're so used to hearing, even on TikTok videos of everyday life. It's that kind of background noise that actually makes you believe that something's real. And so, yeah, I had to undo that. Halfway through the final mix, we had this enormous problem that I had to undo the dial and all the planes came back in. And we had to go and sort of, do an enormous dialogue cleanup, which was complex to say the least.
So you said you would use too much noise reduction. Your director, Chloe, says that it's taking the life out of it.
Yeah.
So you said you went back in at it. So you'd use different tools? Like, how do you approach it differently to still get the planes out, but not take the life out?
A lot of it was editing around it. A lot of it was choosing different takes. And a lot of it was allowing aggressive noise reduction, but only in really terrible areas of plain stuff. A lot of it was putting in a wind that would, masking, using a sound of a nicer sound of a similar frequency to obliterate, because, the human ear only has kind of one hair in its cochlea for each kind of frequency. So you can't hear multiple sounds of the same pitch. You can only hear one sound of this, and it's the loudest one you hear. So that's why people cough when they fart, I expect.
Well played. I wasn't expecting you to go there. That was great.
I didn't know I would.
Well, you bring up an interesting thing, that something that does tie these films together is spectacular acting performances. Emma Stone in Bugonia is fantastic, and Hamnet, Jessie Buckley.
Jessie Buckley, yeah.
Is unbelievable.
Extraordinary.
Everybody is unbelievable. And is there any kind of pressure to stay out of their way in some way with the sound design? Like, do you know what I mean by that?
Absolutely, yeah. And because, like, on Bugonia, one of the first conversations I had with Yorgos about the camera was, yeah, don't worry, I'll make sure that there's like a noisy fan in the basement and you can hear the fridge humming upstairs and all of that. And he was like, And then when I played it to him early on at Mix Room Halo in London, at full volume, and you could clearly still hear the camera noise and the level of all the background sounds that I'd put in to occlude it was just really irritating. And so he had a major rethink and just decided to use sound entirely to describe the kind of headspaces of the characters in a less usual way. So in Michelle's office, it's very clinical and it's harsh and it's very sterile. And that was a challenge because the backgrounds don't really have much movement in them. And everything's pristine. So, the camera noise was quite an issue there. But you're creating something there. And in the basement where I thought I would really get away with some noisy clanging pipes from, imaginary whatever. Again, that was, no, let's use a sort of almost sci-fi hum to describe the character Teddy's, his paranoias and his and the way that his brain is kind of shifting, and particularly Don oscillating between two schools of thought throughout the film. So the backgrounds in Bugonia definitely kind of wander and weave when you're in the basement, and definitely at a very slow pace to absolutely not get away in the way the performances. I mean, there's some pretty long monologues in Bugonia and they're completely arresting and they don't feel long at all. And I think if you were going to meter it out with very detailed sound effects, then that would actually probably would have made it feel longer. So Yorgos hardly ever gives me anything in the way of the brief. Like, most films, he's, says, I hired you, you're the sound guy, play it to me when you're finished. But the one thing he did say on this was, that let's not step on the actors at all. And in Hamnet, wow, Jessie Buckley's performance, I mean, it's extraordinary, isn't it? And clearly obvious, let's not gild any lilies there with anything.
In Hamnet, the scene that just leaves everybody in a puddle is the first time Jessie Buckley sees Hamlet, the play.
Yeah.
And it's in a theater full of people, and the crowd noises and reactions are not something that you can pull from a previous project that you've worked on. Like, these are very specific from a very specific time period. Do you want to talk about how you brought that crowd to life so impressively?
Yeah, it was really fun. Obviously, that had to sound as low-key and anti-Hollywood as possible. Here we are with everyone. Many people have heard of the Globe, but it was a long time ago, and it was a wooden construction. So we wanted to hear all the floorboards and hear the space around us. And it is, it's theatre in the round. There is very much people all around you. Chloe, she's very good at crowd motivation. So at the end of all of those, filming all of those heavy scenes, she would put some like fun, upbeat dance music on, and everyone would dance around and get in a good mood. And, it would lift spirits. And
the extras, you mean?
The extras, yeah. And the actors and the director and the sound people. So the crowd was actually quite buoyant and animated, and they were directed very much to not be quiet. And so there was a hell of a lot of recording of that crowd that we could sift through and edit into place. And there were many specific things like the shushes and, off-camera reactions that were all stuff that we did in the mixing room, with a microphone on the mixing stage to kind of add bits of laughter and
like recorded yourself, you mean? And the sound team?
Yeah. Yes, whoever's around at the time, kind of, right, in you come and and have a go at this. And the crowd in the Hamlet final scene in the play Hamlet are actually very reserved because it is, like you say, melting into a puddle. The hard task was to put the minimal amount in, but still convey the feeling that there was, a large group of people there, which is more about shuffling feet, clothing movement and coughing and, occasional objectionable shouts and things like that.
I got to see Hamnet at TIFF in a sold-out screening, and it's one of the reasons why we love going to the movies is when you can have, I don't know, whatever the full theater was, all going through a deep emotion at the same time together. It's something that doesn't happen anywhere else in our lives anymore. We're also in our own space. And to just be in a room with that many people all weeping, like openly crying and going through some deep emotions, it's something that is so unique to filmmaking, and it's something I've always loved. And it doesn't have to be crying because 28 days later, we're all jumping out of our seats at the same time, These films, and Tuner, which we haven't mentioned yet, gets some great audience reactions too because there's some great reveals in that film as well. Tuner, for anyone listening, hasn't come out yet, but I also got to see that at TIFF. So that'll probably come out in 2026 at some time, but get ready for that. It's a really fun sound-based movie as well.
Yeah, the quasi-vicarious experience of other people around you and knowing how you're feeling, and it's a collective experience. And that is, that should be what cinema is all about. So yeah, well done, Chloe. You knocked it out of the park with that.
Speaking of crowd reactions, in 28 years later, do you want to kind of talk me through your philosophy on how to make a jump scare work? Because there's some real good ones in that movie, and it's not something that you're necessarily known for. I guess Nope had some good ones as well, but maybe do you want to talk to me about how you approach these things?
Yeah, I think with jump scares, you've definitely got to clear the area beforehand, and you've got to reduce things to minimal and remove and redact so that you're not preempting anything. But you've got to do that in a way that it isn't obvious that things are suddenly going quiet. And so a lot of that's the faded movement and just feeling, oh, I've gone too far now. It's obvious that things are going quiet. So, bringing things to a stillness soon enough and then just smashing it really loud is kind of the killer thing. And obviously in conjunction with the timing with the cut. But I think it's like it takes about 80 or 90 milliseconds to process an image, which is, 5 or 6, it's a good chunk of time, because you see something and your brain has to contextualize it and process it and give you a thought about it. Whereas with sound, you do it in about 20 milliseconds and it goes into the brainstem. Images go through your prefrontal cortex and get thought, and sound you react to. And so that's how a jump scare works, is you're trying to do something to play someone a sound that they have no time to think about and they just react to it. And you do that by not letting them think that it's coming in the first place.
So you're saying that all humans, the jump scare, that we react to the sound before our brain can process the picture of it.
Yeah, exactly. Particularly when you're presented with an image, I think you're already scared before you've worked out exactly what that image is. So obviously, a silly image might be the wrong thing. But yeah, it's the sound that gets you, because it goes into your monkey brain, not your thought brain.
In Bugonia, sorry to keep jumping around here, but I want to talk a little bit about all these movies. So in Bugonia, I felt like the sound, the music did this as well, but the sound was kind of giving misdirection a lot. There'd be times where you're thinking that something's happening and the sound is kind of leading you. And then other times where the music is huge and then you're thinking something terrifying is about to happen and then nothing really happens. Do you want to talk about kind of the idea of sonic misdirection?
Yeah, a lot of that is with working with Yorgos, we're very keen to avoid tropes and very keen to avoid giving people something that is just expected. So, for example, Jerskin's score, when he was writing it, we were all actually doing the press tour for Poor Things. And that was like, me and Costume and Emma Stone and Yorgos. And so we spent quite a bit of time together traveling, and we were all discussing the next film that was going to be Bugonia, but we weren't allowed to have conversations in front of Jerskin, because he wasn't allowed to know anything about the script or anything about the film at all. And Yorgos gave him a brief of bees, basement, space. And so he wrote the music to that brief, and then that was put on the film, and it works, in a really extraordinary, unusual way, much like many of Lanthimos' films. They have big music when seemingly nothing is happening, but narrative art-wise, a lot is happening. It's just not visible action. So in some ways, the sound design does work a little bit occasionally more like a traditional underscore of thematically gluing things together between those big moments of Jerskin's, unusual, extraordinary stuff. But yeah, mostly it's about creating juxtaposition and thought by not doing the obvious. So, for example, when Teddy, Jesse's character, cycles into work, at the shipment center, all the sounds that we're hearing there are really more kind of in his head. It's his sort of, paranoias about space and everything. And so cars sound like spaceships, and the fulfillment center sounds more like, the dock of the loading bay of a spaceship than what it actually is, but only in a very subtle way.
Before I let you go, I have 2 questions for you. We're going to jump back to Hamnet now. First, how do you get a bird to chirp in iambic pentameter? Obviously editing, I guess. But
so yeah, we went on a trip to Wales and spent a lot of time trying to get away from traffic. And that gives you very clean recordings of birds and some lovely winds and trees. And, we spent a long time shaking branches, and every tree movement you see in that film has something kind of orchestrated to it. But yeah, we just had clean recordings of birds. And then I, did some studying of Shakespeare. I was really errant at school. I didn't know, English literature is a real backwater of lack of knowledge for me. But that is, and so working out that and doing that into a microphone and then editing bird sounds into that thing was kind of how we got it. But the more fun words were and using a vocoder there's the bird, the sad bird is like, and it sort of sounds a bit like it's kind of crying. And so there's a lot of different birds that aren't necessarily iambic pentameter, but they are definitely the mood of the character who's the, protagonist in whichever scene you might be in.
There's a scene in Hamnet between our 2 main characters. I believe it's the upstairs of their apartment,
yeah.
And they're having an argument. And there's a giant thunderstorm going on in the soundtrack that we never see.
Yeah.
Like there's no thunder, like lightning coming through the windows or anything.
Hell yeah.
But it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Because it's the thunder of their clash, not the outside, even though it's the outside, maybe. Do you want to talk about how that scene kind of evolved? I'm assuming it wasn't in the script that there was a thunderstorm in the background, or they probably would have put flashing lights or something while they were shooting.
No, when I first started talking with Chloe about this film and how to sound design it, my initial thought was, oh my God, 1780 or whatever, nothing made any sound then. Like, there were not cars with music and hi-fis. And then I thought, no, hang on, if you lived in a rural village, you'd be so familiar with all sorts of sounds, and they may be specific, to that. It might be the sheep that you hear, or the wind in the trees that is outside your window. But these are very nostalgic and very specific things that definitely do create an enormous soundscape. And and obviously one of those things is thunder and rain. In part of the genesis of the library, the first few weeks are definitely building the sounds that we're going to use and then putting them to the film. And just some of that was thunder. So Chloe would come in once a week and we'd spend a few hours together and we'd just try different sounds on different scenes. When we put the thunder on the argument, we're like, hell yeah. That carries the mood pretty well. Yeah, and obviously, Max's fantastic score is doing such incredible work in so many places that it's not like there's a huge need to be too descriptive, but when there are powerful things like that you can do, it has great effect. Just quickly, no one will have seen Tuner that's listening to this yet, but the idea of that movie is that it's a main character who has an affliction that lets him have hyperacute hearing, and he's kind of drafted into the mob to pick safes because he can hear. That's right. The idea of representing hyperacute hearing on screen, how did you first approach that, and how did that evolve? Daniel Rohrer, fantastic director. Tuner is such a brilliant movie. Dustin Hoffman is a piano tuner, and he hires a young apprentice, Leo Woodall, to help him. And Leo Woodall has this hearing issue. And when Daniel sent me the script, I called him up. I was like, holy shit, I know exactly what this feels like, because I've actually had this. When I was 17, I took a plastic water bottle and I wedged it under a tap, and the tap was on full blast, and I went out for a run and I forgot about it completely, and I came back like an hour later and the water was only halfway up the bottle, and I thought, that's weird, A, that I forgot it, but B, if I forgot it, I know I would have left the tap on, so why is it only half full? But anyway, it was like a seal, and when I touched the bottle, it was under so much pressure from London ring main water that it exploded in my face, and I was covered in bits of plastic, and a couple of seconds later I realised I was 100% deaf. I was profoundly could not hear a sausage. And at 17, I was like, oh my God, I've killed my hearing. I'm never going to hear me. Which is actually the thing that made me decide to quit university and go and be a sound engineer, because I realised I like sound. But my hearing came back after 20 minutes. But I'd spent 10 minutes standing in front of my hi-fi system playing Rock the Bells, LL Cool J, and feeling the speakers move, but not hearing anything, and thinking, Jesus Christ, I'm deaf. And then when my hearing came back, for a good many months afterwards, I had hyperacusis, which is, sounds are like an allergy, you just, So Tuner is a movie where we have this wonderful young man, Leo Woodall's character, who has to wear earplugs when he's going around daily life to keep the ambient noise down. When he's out in the street, on top of that, he puts ear defenders, big old cuff things, to really block out motorbikes and people shouting. And occasionally he has neither of these things on if he's at home and in a safe environment. Through all that, they work out as a piano tuner, which is his job. So it's wonderful, all the aspects of how the sound works in that. But they also work out he can also do things like hear how safes get open, because he can hear when the pin drops, because his hearing is so sensitive. So Tuner is a movie that has many different perspectives of sound from the same character, when he's doing his job tuning a piano and when he's being attacked by sound. And so, it's a wonderful, glorious Dolby Atmos demonstration of what it's like to have this terrible affliction. And I hope, it resonates with people who suffer from this, although maybe there should be a special screening held at 30 dB or something. It's a really fun movie that would be interesting to sound people for that, but beyond that, it's a really great twist on a heist film. Like, it's just a fun movie. I really enjoyed watching it. It was great talking to you again. Thanks for carving out the time. I know you're very busy right now, but I'm glad that we got to talk about all these great movies that you've been working on and celebrate them a little bit. Oh, it's always a pleasure talking to you, and it's been really good fun. Thank you for your interest in this material. No problem. It's always great to talk with Johnny. He's been a great supporter of Tonebenders over the years. Stay tuned for an excellent talk with the sound team from Tron Ares next week. Trust me, it's not to be missed.
This Cyber Monday, Sound Ideas is offering an incredible opportunity. You can take 50% off all proprietary sound libraries, including some of the most trusted effects in post-production. And for creators looking to expand fast, the General HD Collection is on flash sale at $750, down from its regular $2,995. This is your chance to grab pro-quality sound effects for a fraction of the price. Visit sound-ideas.com to upgrade your sound library today. Tonebenders is produced by me, Timothy Muirhead. Theme music is by Jim Guthrie. You can reach me via email through info@tonebenderspodcast.com. Follow Tonebenders on Instagram to stay on top of new episodes. If you like the show, you can help us out by spreading the word to your friends and colleagues, or leave us a tip. Just go to tonebenderspodcast.com and click support.